I thought we'd have a little fun in making some perspective on my topic. It's important to me, so when I think, I like to think big. So we'll start with the universe. Big place, 91 billion light years. It's a big place. If you take all the matter in the universe, and all the matter in the universe, in the known universe, is about 7 light years across that specific density. So I had some fun and calculated that that would be like a speck of dust in a lake about 100 miles across, a deep lake. So of all that matter, what do you think the most important thing is? Think about that, because it's my topic, so I think it's the most important thing. My bet would be on that, the human cerebral cortex. It is awesome. The Neuroscience Society actually agreed with my analogy. I found out yesterday. I looked at their front page, and they said that is the most complex living thing in the known universe. So they liked my universe analogy. It's been estimated to process at speeds of 3.8 times 10 to the 15th operations per second. 3,500 terabytes of memory. We can't come close to that with our computers. In fact, the only way we may ever come close to that is with a new project that emulates the human brain. And we will talk about this in a minute. That's our animal brain. I'll oversimplify a bit. That's the limbic system, and it's responsible for our flight or fight and all of our feelings. It causes a lot of problems when you want to use your cortex. We'll get to that. Quickly, though, what I'm really here for, I'm a physician, a full-time practicing physician. I take care of children. I specifically chose to take care of children because I believe in human potential, and there's no better place to start than with kids, because they're all potential. But why I'm really here is I have a unique perspective on how our brains work, because about 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with learning disabilities that I didn't know I had, and no one all the way through medical school helped me out with. But when my kids began to get diagnosed with my genetics, I really had to step up. Now, here I am, already a pediatrician, and the system hadn't taught me much about this, which is part of the message today. So I'm here to tell you what amazing things I've found out about what we know about the human brain. It's unbelievable. My parallel is Moore's law is about what we know about computer technology, and they predicted it would double. Our computing power would double every 18 months or so. I would parallel that with what we know about psychology and about how the brain works. Maybe not that steep, but we've learned a lot in the last decade. You are one of the first generations to move into a world where all of the mythology and stigma about the brain, all of the fear of people who behave differently and act differently, and they kind of creep us out. We're getting mental health care kind of is spooky. People resist it. That can all go away soon, because we actually know what's going on in there. So the instruction manual for your brain is now really thick, whereas 10, 20 years ago, it was thin. So in the office, I see patients every day, and when I say, hey, there's something wrong with your kidney, let's fix that. Oh, sure, doc, yeah, let's go. Where do I go? How do I fix that? But when I say, maybe this one's not working so well, this awesome machine is maybe a little off, I get a variety of responses. None of them, very few of them are good. And you've probably all felt that before when someone says, hey, maybe something's going on up there. Maybe you're a little anxious. Maybe you're a little not as smart as you thought, or you function differently. We've all done this. We're trained to do this. I get tears. I get rejection. My favorite is, yeah, there's something wrong with you, doc. nope, see ya. And they're done, because there's something wrong with me for having brought it up. Sometimes it takes me years to explain to people, to have people come around to actually work on this organ. That's very unique, because they'll work on other organs readily. An example I have, I've picked a couple diagnoses. An example I have, depression. 40,000 people a year commit suicide. That, a couple years back, it surpassed motor vehicle accidents as a cause of death in the United States. It's more than firearms. To get to suicide, you have to run through a laundry list of symptoms that any trained clinician could spot in a second. Actually, anybody with a pulse could spot most of these symptoms. But we're trained to go into denial and reject them and make up a lot of excuses as to why that person doesn't need help or why we need to sort of shy away. A lot of things have to be missed by the teachers, by the parents, and by the doctors. Literally, a lot of depressed patients get shut down, or they get worked up for belly pain or headaches. The reason for all of this is stigma. I know you've heard that word before. It is alive and well. And what I've learned in the past decade, learning about my learning disabilities and how the brain works, I think we can kill this. There's a cycle with stigma that I invented, but I don't have a patent on, so you're welcome to it, for this talk. Basically, we fear, we avoid, and then we get more ignorant. Repeat. They each lead to one another. For example, with our kids, we know so much about childhood development now that if we spent some time on it, we would have a lot less struggle with our children. We would actually be able to laugh at what they're doing because it's like, oh, that's normal development. But a lot of times instead we're like, why are you driving me crazy? When 2-year-olds do what they do, a lot of times it's completely normal. But I see a lot of people back down into their animal brain and get all agitated because they don't know. So a lot of times we just shy away from a lot of things in behavior we know much about. And what I see in the office, it's literally like we're handing kids keys to a car and saying, go figure it out. I did, you can, just figure it out. And the consequences are similar in many cases, as opposed to saying, this is how your brain might work, and we can have it work better. Another example, I picked a diagnosis, ADHD. I'm very familiar with this diagnosis. Through imaging, we now have technology where we can see in the brain, we can see what you're feeling, when you're feeling it. We can have pictures of when you're in love, when you're angry, when you're creating something, when you're hungry. We can actually see how that works, and we can see our therapies on it. It's amazing. So for instance, ADHD, the beginning of the last century, the doctors diagnosed you with lack of moral character. That was an official diagnosis. You are bad. Okay, we now know this is a neuroanatomic fact. Okay, it's not red dye number 40, it's not sugar, it's not bad parenting. All of those exist as a separate entity, but it's not that. It's real. People are afraid to even talk about it, though, in their kids and themselves. Those brains, the ADHD brain, the normal brain, cortex develops by age 8, 9. The ADHD brain takes a little longer. When I saw that, I was amazed. I also forgave my son for a lot of things. I'm like, oh, that's why. He's a couple years back. His brain's actually not quite there. But what I would say is to parents is, when you're angry with your kids for things they can't control, because we think we can control a lot more, or when they have things that are harder, we get angry with them, we punish them. That leads to anxiety and depression and a whole other set of dysfunction, which brings everything offline. The teachers, they're trained to teach in a very specific way, audiovisual, sit still, everybody, and they're trained in behavior modification, which means carrot and the stick. If you do what I want, I reward you. If you don't do what I want, you get punished. Some teachers know there's some diversity in brains, and they'll reach out to kids who might learn a little differently. Neuropsychologists, which is a field that's exploding, we actually can test you and find out how you think, and it is vastly different. But neuropsychologists think the average classroom is a little bit more like this. And people who have different modalities are suffering because they don't do the sensible sedan thing. They might, have capacities that are very different. I have some examples of that, but we can literally test people, not just are you smart or are you dumb? Do you process quickly? Do you have a memory that's vast or small? Are you good at math or are you not good at math? We don't have to wing it anymore. We know these things. And then how the prefrontal cortex, which is where we are, this is where our personalities are, this is what makes us the ultimate in the universe, how that communicates to the rest of your body. When that's out, you have problems with executive functions, which is how this communicates to the rest of your body and gets you to do things. Focus, stay on task, remember things in a reasonable format. It's pretty amazing, and we can test for it, and we can see when it's not working well, which means those kids who are lazy, there's actually something we know is going on, and we can help with it. But, lazy usually leads to punished, ostracized, depression. It doesn't have to. We can actually help with that. It's been said that these executive functions are the basis for all of our regulation. How we keep our emotions in check, for instance. So we all learn differently. I'll give you some examples. All of these kids, these are actual examples of numbers. I left off specifics. These are all patients. They all came to me. The middle is the average. They all came to me suffering in school. If you look, they have some full-scale scores that are off the, this guy, pretty much smarter than most of us in the room. Maybe one or two people are as smart as this guy. He came to me depressed and anxious and doing poorly in school. This one, brilliant. But that score, I think that was processing speed. That score will ruin that kid's life if no one understands that it's there. They'll be like, oh, she can't take tests, she flunks everything, oops, oh well. And then there's some kids who perform very well, but maybe there's something we couldn't test for. This kid actually came and he was really suffering, and his executive function was out, which doesn't show up on this test, which means he couldn't focus. Actually, we call that ADD. It's not on the test. And interestingly, when you're anxious or depressed, you get ADD-like symptoms. Your executive functions go out. So it happens to all of us. Bet you didn't know that. You can all get ADD. I'll give you ADD if I annoy you greatly. So what are we going to do about this? Obviously, there's a lot of information. Clearly, we can educate people more about everything we know. And that's what I do in the office, but sometimes it takes me years to break through the stigma and the fear. So it takes a little courage to talk about these things. So I'll start, hey, I'm Dr. Ed, I've got ADD, I've got a little dyslexia, some anxiety, some social anxiety, I kind of deal with it pretty well. And I know a lot about it, and I don't care anymore. And I'm moving forward. And so are my kids. It's great. But there are some barriers. So if you've ever had an issue, and you've thought something might be holding you back, there are some barriers. So my first slide is, every one of these systems was designed at a time of stigma, because the information has come quickly. So they're all stacked against us. They are not designed to really educate and teach and pick up problems in people. Teachers, for instance, I told you already, behavior modification is what they're trained in. Well, if you're born without legs, you can't punish or reward someone enough to get their legs back. So if you're born with a slow processing speed, it's not behavior. And the teachers tell me, and they come to me with their kids for learning problems, the teachers. The teachers all have universally said, we are not prepared for this. We are not prepared to deal with all the fighter jets and dump trucks that we now realize kids are. The doctors, they have just as much stigma as the rest of us. I'm one, I work there, I know. I was one, we were not trained well. And I've been there, we're just not trained well with this. I can just say one fact, the physician suicide rate is 2 to 3 times more than the general public. That says a little something about awareness. So you have to assert yourself. So if you ever want to solve a problem with your brain and you want to see a professional or learn about it, the information's all there. But you have to assert yourself and don't give up. Because there's a lot of people in those systems who won't help you. That's not the end. You need to find a different person. Because there's somebody there that can actually help with problems that your loved ones may have, you may have, your kids may have. That's Brian. He's brilliant. He has a little high-functioning autism. He wanted to get into a specific vocational program, and stigma was in his way. They just didn't want him there because, he's different, And his mom fought and fought, and now he's the top of the class. He's thriving. They all want to be his partner. He's crushing it, and he's enjoying it. They said, nobody gets the sophomore extra credit award. He did. All because she slammed through the stigma. The next tip I would have for you, if you ever want to really optimize how your brain works, or at least, because we're all old, we're a little bit ruined, at least for our kids, if you ever want to optimize things for them, we have to have some humor, okay? We have to be able to laugh about things. We have to take things less seriously and get the fear out of our system. Y'all read that. I think it's funny. We're not suffering. We're kind of enjoying it. And actually, the households that I have affected the most, they rally. They enjoy it. They, of course, don't enjoy it, but they laugh about it and bond about it and work through it, whatever it is. This was last week at a fair. Dopamine, serotonin, get some. Meaning an oxytocin. These are good chemicals in your brain. They make you happy. They make you perform better. They reward you. So we have to have a sense of humor about this because it gives us good chemistry. So metacognition is, thinking about thinking. And in this case, we are thinking about thinking about thinking. Highly recommended. Last couple of tips for you is few people are aware of. When you get grouchy, we'll get rid of the universe there. When you get grouchy, your frontal lobe starts to shut down. When you get a little more grouchy, a little frustrated, or maybe you pitch a fit, or maybe you're just having a total meltdown, you're shutting off all of the awesome part of your brain and just acting on your lower brain. So, for instance, people fight. People have an argument. It's time to say, time out. Can we have a time out and go back into our grown-up human brain? Few people know that. Few people respond to that. So the way I see people now, after all of this work, my son drew that, I see a lot of brains, and I don't see pretty, overweight, weird, strange behavior. I don't see that anymore. I just see what the neuropsychologists have taught me. I see assets and liabilities. And I encourage you to see that in people. Someone that's acting different, they probably function differently. But what could they do? I tell my son, what are your superpowers? What are you good at? What scores on your chart are the highest? You can find these things out, or you can embrace them and stop trying to be what your greater culture thinks you should be. So here's a discussion you might have, or never have. So 2 brains. I don't have a lot of friends if I see people like this. I just don't have a lot of friends. 2 brains talking. Hey, I see you have a little anxiety. Oh, yeah, but I've got it under control. Oh, that's great. You can still be my friend. Oh, but I see you process a little slowly. Oh, yeah, but I try and work around it. I make some accommodations. Oh, we could team up. And I process quickly, and I have an IQ that's really high. Oh, we could do great work together. Instead, the conversation is, man, that dude's neurotic. He's kind of weird and edgy. Yeah, I can't be his friend. That dude's dumb. Even though that dude's IQ is higher than the other dude. He's dumb, I can't. And we kind of, We ostracize, we socially exclude. So I encourage you to see people like brains. Last few points would be, we need to stop making excuses. I would question if there's anyone in the room who hasn't heard and or made an excuse for something in mental health that we could fix, because we're trying to avoid it because of stigma, because we're afraid of it. Oh, it's hormones. Oh, it's just a middle child thing. Oh, it's a girl thing. It's a guy thing. You're just, it's sensitive. You're just kind of sensitive. We have definitions of those, and we can help with that, because those things can change your life, or you can change those things and run your life. So if you've ever had anything, you've been excessively tired, can't concentrate, wondered if there's something holding you back from studying better, we can help with that. And I'm not talking about medicine, by the way. I haven't mentioned that. There's a lot of techniques and a lot of information. The last thing I'll say is it often takes me years to break through to families to have them understand the power of their brain and understand that there is actually help. This guy came to me really distraught, and his family was really nervous about talking to me because all we do is put people on pills. That's one stigma. And that's fear. It causes a lot of fear in people. It took me a few years, and then we got a diagnosis, and we found out that guy's really smart. He's smarter, again, his stats, he's probably smarter than most people in the room, because I know his stats. And so this wasn't him complaining, actually. He wasn't feeling bad for himself. He was actually having humor when he did this. He was advocating for himself, saying, hey, this is how my brain works, and I'm going to get things done. Seek an alternate route if you need to, because this is how my brain works. What's brilliant about this is the family made T-shirts on family vacation. They rallied around this, whereas a few years prior, they were afraid to talk about it. And he was getting depressed and anxious. They rallied around this kid. And that's the kind of world we need, because we have the technology to help people with anything with your brain. So, to close, I would just encourage you to think about what I've said and think about if there are ways that you could better your life or better the life of your loved ones. And if we can't do it for ourselves, being already made, I would recommend we think about it for them. Thank you.